Bonjour, et mesdames et messieurs. Welcome back to Broken French. Today we're going to enjoy a very special episode of Wanderous. I'm your host, Andrew Crusoe, and today we're going to go to Mont-Saint-Michel. If you're not familiar, Mont-Saint-Michel is the product of a dream. It is the project of a dream, or should we say, a vision that Aubert of Avaranche, I'm sorry, I'm going to be murdering these French names. I'm not great at pronouncing French stuff, I'm sorry. But he had a vision that the Archangel Michael appeared to him and instructed him to build a church on this small island in Brittany. In fact, in 2023, the then president of France had a celebration of 1,000 years of the abbey. In the previous episode, I made a mistake. I said that it was about 100 meters from the coast. I was wrong. It's about 1,000 meters from the coast, but it's quite in view. And today I'm going to go inside. If you have not seen a picture of this architectural and historic accomplishment, please look up Mont Saint. I'm going to say it like an American so it's easier for you to spell Mont-Saint-Michel. But it's Mont-Saint-Michel. Pronunciation is important. The French people will look at you funny. You say Mont-Saint-Michel. They'll be like, you're ruining our language. Don't ruin other people's languages. Don't do it. Now, of course, Mont-Saint-Michel is a major tourist destination. Not just because it has a history of over 1,000 years, not just because there are very enjoyable little tours you can take, of which we took, I stumbled into one anyway, but because it is a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place. It feels like you're in a movie, and it is a very photogenic place. It is the kind of place that you want to bring extra batteries. So we got there, and there are even little buses you can take from the parking lot. It's a little ways. We decided to walk for about, 20 minutes to get over this long bridge. Now, if it had been low tide, we could have walked there in theory. But you do need to be careful about quicksand. That's a real thing. So everybody comes here. You'll see that there's such a diversity, and the whole place, we were very lucky. The weather was fantastic. The whole place is just many, many steps. Once you get there, you end up, you are in the main small road, but you end up going up a lot of steps, and you end up getting quite some interesting views in the process. It is stonemasonry 360 all around you. But it feels very thoughtfully made. It just feels very, very, very old, obviously. So I'm there, and I'm taking photos of all these some maze of stairwells. One thing I love about Mont-Saint-Michel, there actually are some hidden places that I could not really describe to you. But you will realize if you go there that you can get lost, and so there's like cafes on the ground, you know what I mean, like on the ground level, and there are tours you can do, and there are descriptions, all these stories. There's so many stories about Mont-Saint-Michel and the people who live there. Now, currently, there are 29 people, monks, living in the abbey at Mont-Saint-Michel. It is still a sacred site. And one of the plaques that we came across wandering around was this plaque about the anniversary. So to mark the 20th anniversary of the arrival of monastic fraternities of Jerusalem at the abbey, photographer Vincent M., Vincent M., I guess he doesn't like his last name, who adores Mont-Saint-Michel and its bay, is presenting a dozen large format photos that evoke daily life. In the middle of the 7th century, a first community of hermits settled on a rock in the bay, and that's what this was in the beginning. It was called Montum. Looked after at the outset by a dozen church canons, the place progressively grew into one of the biggest pilgrimage centers in Western Europe, notably with the support of one Duke of Normandy who, in 966, saw the establishment of a Benedictine community here. For 8 centuries, the monks at the Abbey of Mont-Saint-Michel would act as builders, managers of vast estates, and scribes of sumptuous manuscripts. What a hilarious adjective for manuscripts. All the while overseeing the welcoming of vast numbers of pilgrims from across the whole of Europe. At the French Revolution, the monks were expelled, and the buildings were transformed into a prison. Up to 1863, this was a prison. It would only be a century later, at the end of the 1960s, that the Abbey, which had been listed as a historic monument belonging to the French state, would welcome a new Benedictine community. There were no Benedictines for 100 years. Then, in June of 2001, the Order of the Monastic Fraternities of Jerusalem took the baton. Following the direct line of their predecessors, this order's monks and nuns dressed in blue habits follow a rule based around the 3 pillars: prayer, work, community life. That gives you a bit of a flavor for it, but I call me cynical, and maybe I am. I don't think that all of the tourism they were getting was religious tourism, based on some stories I heard on the ground level. So apparently there are many trinkets and handmade artisans who would go, artisans who make these beautiful little carved figures and toys and things, and those have been sold there for hundreds and hundreds of years. Just looking at this place from the coast, it's hard for one not to feel like I have to go to this freaky little island. It looks so cool. And then you get there, and then once you step onto it, you realize, oh, wow, there is a gravity of the place, of the sense of devotion that these monks have to that land, even though it's only about, 7 hectares? Yeah, or 17 acres. This sense of devotion is something I would feel in various places around the world. When people have a ritual on a piece of land, if you are grounded in your feet, you can feel that. If you are sensitive, you can feel it palpably. Here's another story about liturgical life. Founded in Paris in 1975, the monastic fraternities of Jerusalem have been established at the Mont-Saint-Michel since 2001. The liturgies of these offices reflect several traditions between Eastern and Western Christianity and are open to all visitors passing through, as well as pilgrims who have come especially pray at Mont-Saint-Michel. The further you go, and there is a point where you do need to pay another 10 or 12 euros, which my great uncle was very generously just offered when we got up there. So I was like, do we really want to? And I was like, yeah, no. And we did it. And you get a more and more interesting view of frankly, the coast is not very photogenic, in my opinion, but it's weird. And there is a dam further up, which they've recently redone since this visit, since my photos. It actually allows more water to come into that part. So this looks a bit better than these 2022 photos now, I would think. Although it's still weird. It's still interesting to look at because you can see the delta of this river and the way that they've segmented things. Now, around this time is when I wandered into a walking tour and really started to get into this labyrinth of stairwells and art that they had woven into the church further up. There's a central courtyard at the very top that's very pretty with some white flowers and some amazing view. But it's hard to capture just how complex and really bizarre the layout of this place feels when I was there. Especially if you're there in the late afternoon. The light comes in at these very strange angles. There's a especially beautiful place with this staircase as the light was coming through, lighting it up all gold. And there's a couple things that really struck me wandering around Mont-Saint-Michel. One of the things was that they actually have a big pulley system, a big wheel that the tour guide told us a bit about, that they would use it to pull up blocks and other building equipment up, like dozens of meters, like hundreds of feet up to the top when they were completing the abbey. And they still have this wheel, and they still have a couple of the ropes, and you can stick your head out in this narrow from this narrow window and look down, and it's it could be really, you could do a lunge from there. It'd be a wild thing. Maybe they should set up a zip line. But incredible art, an incredible sense of beauty, regardless of the worn out bits here and there. The other thing I really loved was there was a part of the tour that actually the quality of the wall completely changed. And I was so thankful that I had stumbled into a tour at this moment, because the tour operator said this is where they carved into the mountain itself. They wanted to complete this room. And they said, oh, that's right, he said something weird and mystical. Yeah, he said when they were doing this, people would try to chip off pieces of the mountain, and they thought it would give them, they thought it had like healing properties. So they they had to, one of the monks said, okay, here's the deal. Anybody who steals rocks from here is going to get a curse. And then people stopped taking bits of the wall after that. People would get very superstitious about it. And of course there's all of these anecdotal stories of, oh, this person took a piece of the rock and then they were sick for a year. And these things happen. But it was beautiful the way that they blended the natural masonry into the living stone, into the original rock of the actual mount. It was seamless. And I don't have a picture of it, and I can only ascribe that to, I have a lot of pictures of this place, but I can only say that the tour guide must have said, we don't want you to take photos in this room. And I didn't want no curse. There was some very weird art that I don't understand, that were original, very, very, they had these, it looks like something Da Vinci would have done, but it was incomplete. So they have some like flowers of life sort of symbols, and like something looks like a corpse. And I'll be sure to include that. It's very haunting. And there'd be these random bits of art just on the wall, but there wasn't that much. I like this bit with the stairwell coming up and the light behind, but the whole place was, you could go there every day for a week and find a whole new area. It was just vast, huge. Even the views were pretty hilarious. There's a whole elevated area where it's extremely shallow for a couple kilometers out. You only really see the darkness of the real deep sea far off in the distance. Well, since I'm talking about this day, I might as well talk about our brief visit to Saint-Malo, or Saint-Malo. Now, Saint-Malo is also quite touristy place, not terribly far, that has tons of history that went over my head for some of it, because it was being delivered at a rapid rate by my great uncle, who has a strong French accent, so I didn't necessarily get all of it. Saint-Malo is quite an entertaining, I would say, quite a dynamic coastal town. There are old forts perched on the precipices going into the English Channel. There is a kind of a fortress town bit that has plenty of things like gelato and weird candy shops, very entertaining looking candy shops. And we kind of just swung by right after Mont-Saint-Michel because it was nearby. We were there for maybe an hour. And it was low tide, so there were all of these small yachts and fishing boats just kind of stuck on the sand. And one of the funny bits I enjoyed, this was definitely like a small micro adventure, but one of the funny bits I enjoyed, and I'm definitely going to include this, was they had created, and I'm curious if people have thoughts about this. They had created basically a public swimming pool outdoor, but they had just sort of trapped some of the seawater. I think they just routed it up, and I think that in high tide, yeah, it looks from this photo, which is quite a thing. It looks like something from a Where's Waldo book. There's all of these figures on this, this like flat sandy area with a hill behind. It's the coast. The northern coast of France is a very interesting kind of rolling, occasionally briny, fort-dotted landscape. Of course, it has a very, very long history of warfare and border disputes. I mean, one of the, England had a French king at one point, and France was controlled by northern. You have Normandy being controlled by the Normans, who are actually just Vikings, and the bits that I know are quite fascinating, and I'm not an expert on that at all. But even knowing a bit, it's charming. Of course, the actual fort of Saint-Malo, which is where we were inside the walled city, is all cobblestones and very beautiful. And I wish that I'd taken more photos of this, but I was pretty tired after exploring Mont-Saint-Michel all day. I guess the next thing we did was the salt guy. Yeah. So we had a nice moment and had some gelato, being intolerant au lactose, because lactose is not going to work for my body. We found something that didn't have lactose, thank goodness, and we chilled in the shade. And it was hot, by the way. It was a hot day. I'm not going to give you numbers, but it was hot. It was quite hot. Oh man, this fudge with the almonds on it, I got to include this photo. This is so delicious. Oh my gosh. And it was a lovely Bretagne, Normandy kind of day. But the real surprise would come the following day when we met the Salt Man. The Salt Man and his salt flats and his, I'm going to say this in the silliest possible way, the bird peeping Tom situation. And the rocks. Oh, the rocks. The rocks that said so many things, just lying about the whole salt flat. So we'll get to talk about that next time, because that place deserves its own little episode. So thank you so much for listening. If you're not already subscribed, please follow me for free on Patreon, patreon.com/HelloCrusoe, or please find me on Spotify. If you're listening to this, links to both of those will be in the show notes connected to this episode. That should be nearby. Usually it's below wherever you're listening. And thank you so much for your support. This is basically a labor of love, and I'm so excited to share with you some of the enlightening and marvelous things, frankly, that happened to me when I was in France, and then eventually, when we get there, Nepal as well, the roof of the world. I'll see you next time.